Battle of the Atlantic was not a single battle, but nonetheless directed the course of the war. German U-boats threatened to cut off British shipments and was one of the most feared weapons in the Second World War. The newly built battleship Bismarck and Tirpitz also represented a deadly threat to the Royal Navy that was already dangerously overstretched. Alas, with the sinking of the Bismarck in 1940 and the developments of sonar and radar, both the German U-boats and their battleships were ultimately defeated, ensuring a steady supply of materials to Britain to combat Germany. The Siege of Leningrad was one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the Second World War. When the German army invaded Russia, Army Group North headed to capture the Soviet city of Leningrad. Leningrad was strategically important for the Germans. Once captured, the Germans could use its port facilities to transport supplies into Russia, as well as cut off a vast Soviet army fighting German Army Group Center. However, the Russian defenders held on to the city despite nearly constant artillery fire and bombing. The city was not freed of German assault until 1944, when the Red Army started its offensive to invade Germany. Operation Barbarossa is the largest land invasion in world history. In early 1941, Hitler and the German High Command were planning the invasion of the Soviet Union, building up nearly 5 million men on the borders of Russia. On the 22nd of June 1941, the invasion commenced and took the Red Army by complete surprise. Millions of Soviet troops were captured and killed, and the Russian military was nearly totally defeated with Hitler's blitzkrieg tactics, which overwhelmed the under-equipped and undersupplied Red Army. By December of 1941, the Wehrmacht was on the gates of Moscow, but failed to take the city, thus ending the invasion in defeat. Operation Barbarossa ranks as one of the most important battles in World War II because it spelled the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. For after the German defeat at Moscow, the Wehrmacht were locked in a deadly battle of attrition against the largest and most resource-rich country on Earth. The Battle of Britain was one of the largest aviation battles during the war. Hitler had plans to conquer the British Isles with Operation Sea Lion, but when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, these plans were postponed indefinitely. Confident of Germany's air superiority, Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, convinced Hitler he could bomb Britain into oblivion. Hitler took to the idea, and the large-scale bombing of British cities commenced. In what was known as the Blitz, the German Luftwaffe flew sorties over London and various other British cities, in an attempt to destroy citizen morale and force Britain's surrender. However, with the newly produced radar and the breaking of German Enigma codes, the British were able to start scoring kills on their nemesis, and by May of 1941, the Battle of Britain was officially over. The Battle of Britain and the Blitz is arguably one of the first major defeats of the war, and showed the world that Germany was not invincible. The Battle of Midway is the only battle on this list that did not involve Nazi Germany. However, it was a critical turning point in stopping the Japanese conquest of the Pacific. It is widely known that Japan knew that they could not win a war against the United States. However, their plan was to consolidate their conquered territory and go on the defensive. Midway Atoll was one of the final destinations on their list. With control of Midway, the Japanese would be in complete control of the entire western sphere of the Pacific Ocean. This proved to be fatal for the Japanese, as they went on to lose 4 aircraft carriers, which absolutely crippled the Japanese fleet. While the Americans also suffered losses, they were easily replaced due to huge amounts of resources in the mainland. The Japanese carrier loss could never be replaced, which is why Midway was the tipping point of the Japanese aggression in the Pacific. The Battle of the Bulge was undoubtedly the largest battle fought during ground operations in the Western Front. Hitler was toying with the idea for months of attacking the Western powers in a bid to renew the war effort and possibly negotiate a separate peace in order to focus his attention on the Eastern Front. The offensive was kicked off on December 16, 1944, spearheaded by Hitler's last reserves of Panzer and Tiger tanks. Initially, the offensive took the Western forces by surprise, as they were not expecting an assault so massive, especially in the winter. However, mechanical issues and lack of fuel grounded the German offensive to a halt, and by the 25th of January 1945, the Germans were pushed back to their original positions. The Battle of the Bulge was significant because after the Germans' defeat, it was clear that Nazi Germany was on the path to inevitable defeat, and the Allies would not negotiate a separate peace. By early 1945, Nazi Germany was crumbling under the all-out assault of the Red Army and the Western powers. On April 20th, 1945, Hitler's birthday, the Russians launched the Vistula-Oder offensive, with goals at capturing Berlin as quickly as possible. The costs were high for the Red Army, but they were able to cripple what was left of the German resistance on the Zayloff Heights, securing an open path to Berlin. By April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler was dead, and the remaining defenses of Berlin crumbling. The Germans officially signed a surrender agreement on May 7, 1945, officially ending the Second World War in Europe. For the destruction of the Third Reich, the Battle of Berlin ranks as one of the most important battles of the war. After the defeat at Stalingrad, the German High Command was determined to continue their dominance in the Eastern Theater. They believed that if Germany could launch one more blitzkrieg attack, the Red Army would sustain losses so high that they would be able to continue their conquest of Russia. The Kursk salient around the city of Kursk was chosen as the area of attack because it offered strategic importance if the Germans broke through the defenses. However, the Russians had been fortifying the Kursk salient for months, and had ample mobile reserves in the event of an attack. Nevertheless, the German assault began on July 4, 1943, spearheaded by thousands of Panzer and Tiger tanks. The Russians were prepared, employing thousands of their own tanks against the German onslaught. With the fighting raging, and just as Germany was gaining the upper hand, the indecisive Hitler ordered the entire Panzer Corps to be transferred to Italy to combat the new Allied invasion in Sicily. This proved to be a fatal mistake, as many historians believe that Germany was days away from breaking the Soviet lines. If Hitler would have allowed the attack to continue, then the War of Russia may have taken a very different turn. This is why Kursk ranks among the most important battles of the Second World War. Many don't see the importance of the Normandy invasion. However, the invasion led to serious repercussions for the German army. D-Day, June 6, 1944, was the largest seaborne invasion in the history of mankind. Hundreds of thousands of troops landed in Normandy on that fateful day. However, some wonder if the invasion was at all necessary in the first place. Let me explain why it was. At this point in time in 1944, it was obvious that Germany was on the path for destruction, as the Red Army was pushing back the Wehrmacht on all fronts. However, the Normandy invasion, along with the entire Western Front operation, probably ended the war prematurely. The invasion opened up a three-front war against Germany, in which Germany had to counter with irreplaceable aircraft, tanks, and troops that were needed to fight the advancing Red Army and the advancing Allied armies in Italy. While the casualties were high on the Western Front, it secured the fact that Germany was to be defeated in 1945, rather than in 1946 or 1947. For this, Operation Overlord, or in this case D-Day, can be seen as a smashing success for the Allies, as much needed relief was brought to the war-torn Red Army. Stalingrad is easily the most decisive and important battle of the war. In the summer of 1942, the German High Command launched Operation Blue, set at capturing the oil fields of the Caucasus. Initially, the Wehrmacht were highly successful, taking most of the Caucasus area in a few months. The German Sixth Army then marched towards the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. The battle was one of the most destructive in history, with each side suffering hundreds of thousands of casualties. The Germans nearly succeeded in capturing the city when on November 19, 1942, the Red Army launched a counteroffensive named Operation Uranus, bent on destroying the German flanks and surrounding the German Sixth Army. The plan succeeded, and the entire Sixth Army was surrounded. Hermann Göring, leader of the Luftwaffe, stated that he could supply the Sixth Army by airdrops. However, this turned out to be impossible. With little supplies and clothing, the Sixth Army surrendered in January of 1943. This loss of manpower and machines spelled doom for Nazi Germany. A once untouchable juggernaut had been beaten so badly, the Germans had to transfer massive amounts of men and equipment from the Western Front to replace their losses at Stalingrad. Stalingrad also set the war into one of attrition, which weakened the German army, which was not capable of resisting. For this, Stalingrad ranks as the most important battle of the Second World War.